On a mission to talk about death openly and often so it becomes a day to day dinner table conversation. Natasha Sharma joins me today from Mumbai, India. I'm Jennifer Regular, the host of Awaken and Ascend, where I get to bring spiritual changemakers and healers from around the world to share their wisdom so you can become a fuller expression of who you are and create greater meaning and fulfillment. And this means also fully embracing all of what we go through, including death. I am so glad you're all here joining me. And so let me introduce you to today's guest. Natasha Sharma is an author, speaker, and mentor. She speaks and writes about death and change and finding abundance through accepting death. She mentors people in their journey of self worth and its relation to money and manifestation. So, how does all of this fit together? Well, today you're going to find out. Natasha, it is so wonderful having you here, and it's such a joy and a pleasure to have you all the way joining me from India.
Such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me, Jennifer.
Thank you. And this is a topic that's actually near and dear to my heart, Natasha, and especially in the way that you want to normalize conversations around death. You know, that's just something that I got to experience since I was 6 years old. And by the time I was 21, there were 17 deaths that I had gone through family and friends, and so much more since then. And I stopped counting at that point. And for me, it was normal. It was normal having those conversations, but not with all of my peers, with one friend in particular, because going through high school, you know, most kids would hang out at the mall here in Canada anyway, where I'm from. And for us, we would call the funeral home in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, our hangout. You know, for the other kids, it was the mall. For us, it was Paul O'Connor Funeral Home because that's where we spent a lot of our time because both of us had so many people that had passed around us, you know, and so as deaths continued on, I mean, that's part of life and trying to find people to talk about it with, it does scare a lot of people or kind of they shy away from it because it's something that not something necessarily that they want to face or think about when their parents die or their siblings or friends and loved ones. And so how did this all come about for you, Natasha? Where did this become the thing that you want to become a normal conversation around the dinner table?
So, somewhat similar to you, I faced death pretty early on in my life. Not as early as you, to be fair, but I mean, ironically, I remember when I was about 8, I was having this conversation with a group of friends at school, and people they were saying, "Oh, I have one grandparent, or I have two, or I have three," and I was like, I remember looking at them very quizzically thinking, how's that possible? You have one mom, you have one dad, and they have parents. So everyone should have four. I mean, that's just common sense, you know. That's how naive I was at 8. And then the universe decided to teach me otherwise. So I lost my first loss was when I was 14. My grandfather, who I was actually closer to than I was to my own parents, my dad's dad. He died when I was 14. Immediately afterwards, my mother became very sick and she died sooner after I turned 16. And those are, you know, there's no correct age to ever lose a parent, I believe. But in your formative year, especially when you're 16, is, you know, as a girl, as a female, you'll identify that, you know, that's the time that you're trying to create a separate identity from your mother, and there's that love hate thing going on, and to lose that sort of um testing ground at that age really just set some things out of whack. So anyway, that was that. And then as and out of my whole peer group, I was the first one to have lost a parent. And then I sort of became the residential expert. So as a few of my friends parents died soon after my mother, a couple of months later and stuff like that, so I became, you know, the go-to person. But when I had faced my loss, I had nobody. And well, to be fair, they tried, but they just couldn't understand. I mean, you're so young, and then how do you even start to process what has happened to your friends mother and what your friend might be going through, it doesn't just really, compute. So that these were the seeds that got planted. And then shortly afterwards, I have lost people to all kind of deaths, from suicide to terrorism to old age to, I mean, I've pretty much faced the whole gamut, front seat view. And but I didn't stop to process it up until the pandemic. When the pandemic happened, and suddenly there were so many people left, right, and center in concentration, dying irrespective of health conditions or age, is when I was like, hold on a second, what is going on? Like, so I figured that there was something more that I had to learn and process from this. So one day I looked at myself in the mirror and I was like, hey, people are dying. What if I died? And I found myself so full of fear, Jennifer, that I was like, this is not healthy, because I'm a clinical hypnotherapist and I understand the mind, emotion, and how that, plays out, in your physical body and in your reality. And I was like, no, 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 this amount of fear isn't right, especially when, of course, I'm going to die one day. And okay, there's a one day. What if the one day, the someday is today? Then what? And I actually looked into my own eyes and I started crying, and I found myself sort of grieving for myself. And then I was like, okay, we have to be practical about this. So then I started having conversations with my husband that if I die, you need to do XYZ. This is what I want. I started putting my passwords together in a place so that he had access to that information. I didn't get a formal will in place at that point in time. And I then experienced a series of deaths of people around me who left their affairs completely in disarray. People who were intelligent, financial people, successful business people, their affairs were left in such, I can't even think of the word. It was shocking. It was absolutely shocking. And the family members who had to deal with that, with the grief and the loss and the shock, were also now left with all of this stuff to sort of sort out through. And that's when I decided that no, it is ridiculous. Anything alive is going to die one day. And for whatever reason, people have denial or don't want to talk about it, like you said in the introduction, that it's not practical. And so that's when I decided to, step up and start talking about it. And since, like I said, I've had so much experience with it, firsthand experience with it, I decided to start writing about it and speaking about it, so as to open the conversation. So I first wrote about my mother's death, and then I do plan to write a whole book, on the other various deaths that I have witnessed and sort of processed and gone through myself.
So then how did that conversation start when you were talking about speaking and writing and that process, and starting with your mother's death? What did you feel came through? What rose up inside of you as a conversation starter? Where did that go?
So I just decided, I mean, it's a good point you touch on. I mean, writing was a task and a half. So I had this idea that I was going to be, writing a full book and stuff like that. But I honestly didn't know how the world of publishing worked and how to sort of go about it. So I got an opportunity to be part of a collaboration. So 25 authors, one chapter each. It was called Wealth Codes, Sacred Strategies for Abundance. And the book was divided into 5 parts. There was relationship, love, success, spirituality, sorry, freedom, and money. And so I decided to take the freedom category and write about death, because when I had processed my own death during the pandemic, like I just touched upon, the minute I sat down and I thought about my possessions, the material things, and I thought, okay, this goes to this one, this goes to this one. Now I'm left with nothing. Now, what am I gonna do with the rest of the resources that I'm going to earn in my life. And I found myself making a series of different choices, which is how now myself and my husband are building a home up in the mountains, and we just want to enjoy being alive, and we just want to enjoy being a part of this world without being part of the rat race. And that's something that happened because we reprioritized and found whatever genuinely made us happy, and not what we should do or what is defined as success, and the holiday home or the yacht or the second car or the Rolex or whatever have you. I mean, there's nothing wrong with things are good, but I think a realization that you can't take the things with you is very important. And honestly, Jennifer, I'm sure you'll agree, during the pandemic, the lockdown, the biggest lesson was we were all living in the 7 pairs of pajamas and the household slippers every day. And that's all you really need. So
That's all you
it
need.
really made
They're a
me
good
take
pair
a
of
beat.
pajamas.
Exactly.
And something that I saw many things during that lockdown period, but one of the things was people getting rid of so much stuff, right? They were
Hmm.
starting to clean out the garages and their homes and making space, all those things that we put on the back burner. But you're right, it's the accumulation of all of that in the first place, and then getting down to, okay, what is truly what we need, and creating space for that to enjoy and have space and freedom to live life and not be burdened by all of the things, that we surround
Absolutely.
ourselves with unnecessarily, truly.
Absolutely. And it means different things for different people. And like I said, there's no judgment here. There's nothing wrong with aspiring towards buying the next car or the next watch or whatever. However, that should genuinely be the reason for your happiness. It's
Hmm.
not because it's I mean, it should not be that that qualifies your success if you're wearing the Rolex or not, for example. I'm just saying. But if that genuinely makes you happy, if you think that that is the sign of your hard work and that's why you want to buy it, and that's what, and the whole social status actually brings you happiness and fulfillment, then sure, go for it. But I think that each of us should actually sit and reflect that that's what we really want. And I think the death conversation, ironically, allows for that somehow. It comes into tandem, and then you can actually define what abundance means to you, what success means to you. And then it's very easy to then line it all up with your self-worth and call in that abundance.
Yes, it's a very interesting way to think about it. Buying yourself a gift or something that brings joy, that you love, and that you feel like you earned and want to celebrate in that way. That's a
Mhm.
beautiful thing. That's really coming from a place of love and joy. And we went from talking about wakes and funerals into celebrations of life, and success of life, not the success of the person necessarily, right? Who they
Mhm.
became as a doctor or a politician or whatever, but the success of the life that they led and the impact and influence they had on their family, their neighbors, their community, their friends, their themselves, and what gets remembered long after we leave the earth is that core essence, the spirit of who they are, I find. 'Cause that's what I heard when I was at those different funerals and wakes and celebrations of life. I would hear people talking about what the person who had passed meant to them,
Mhm.
and what became important and what we valued when we've suffered from loss or experienced loss, because not all loss is a suffering per se.
Right.
We might miss the person, we might miss some aspects of the person. And some of us also know that it just changes form. That core
Yes.
energy, their core essence, that spirit is still alive, whether you feel that out there or just in your heart or in your memories or in your photo books, it's still there, or some keepsake or memento you've kept that they've given you or that you took from the estate or whatever it might be, however it is that you want to carry that on. And so, what kind of things would people start talking about around this dinner table if death did become normalized, do you think, Natasha? What would be the topics?
I would honestly love what I visualize to be the conversation to be so, where let's say there's a family sitting around the table, all different ages from 6 years old to 60, and the outside of those brackets as well. But let's just say, for the sake of just conversation, 6 to 60, sitting across a table, and the way that you would be planning a birthday party for, let's say, the 6-year-old, to be talking about the death of anybody around that table as easily.
Wow.
So what I find is, the more we talk about sensitive subjects, the more the charge goes away from it.
Yeah.
These conversations will be the solace that adds to those memories when the loss happens. Because in today's day and age, and of course it's always been the case, but somehow post pandemic things have changed more dramatically than, earlier, when I guess the youth would die in war, and this is our war, I guess. Each generation has its own challenges, but now we don't know who's going to die when, and which age, so there's no guarantee. So everybody should have their affairs in order. Everybody should be prepared to die themselves and to lose the people around them. And I think that also unlocks another kind of abundance, which is to make every moment precious. I know we say these things, but I don't know how many of us actually mean it. That when we meet a friend, perhaps this is the last time we're meeting them. So one doesn't have to think through that lens per se, but to really enjoy that moment when you're with your friends, so that it really is a memory if something happens to either one of you in between. So, to talk about um when I'm not here, or this is what I would like, I bought this lovely thing, I wish you could have it, or whatever, like, just to talk about stuff. Because I know, for me to have conversations in my family, every time I bring up a conversation, it's kind of like, oh, please don't. And like, can we not talk about this? Can we talk about something else? I'm like, why? It's a reality. I'm driving up and down from the city to the mountains every other week. Anything could happen on the road. It's not just disease. It's not just, anything can happen at any time to anybody. And that's just a fact. And if you're alive, you're gonna die one day. And the energy will definitely transmute into something else. We don't necessarily know what it is. That's faith-based, but all of those things might be in doubt. But the fact that you're going to die is not in doubt, no matter how much you deny the conversation. Me and my grandmother, she and I we used to have conversations on death, and this is way before it became my mission. But we used to have easy conversations on death. However, after she died, I realized I never actually asked her what she wanted done with her ashes. And Jennifer, it was unbelievable. It was just, I just couldn't process it, that there was so much dissension around that amongst her children, my aunts and uncles, and nobody could agree on anything. And I'm just like, I mean, fine, people fight over property. In her case, it wasn't over that, it was about her ashes. Now, if we had had normal dinner table conversations, everybody would have known.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that, Because when you're grieving, anger is a part of the stages of grief. And people will take any opportunity to try to express their grief and their frustration and their sadness. And it comes out in these fights that people have. I mean, you've faced so much death. I'm sure you've seen the drama that ensues inevitably. And that happens because of people are trying to process their grief. So if we can make that easy, and then actually the end is a celebration of the life led, honestly, I can't think of anything better.
Yeah. What a novel idea to talk about, just as if we're planning a birthday party to talk about our celebration of life beyond death. That's beautiful. And then to ease that stress and tension. And like you say, people aren't processing. It's so much to take in and to do after someone passes. So that really helps the process. And it gives people the dignity to make empowered choices too about how they want to be celebrated or what they want as far as their death process goes, that
Absolutely.
transition space. That's beautiful. And I've had people talk about too about even having a living eulogy, sharing
Hmm.
with friends or family what you would say, because after death, we may not know what's being said about us. Wouldn't it be nice to know all of these things that people are thinking and feeling and that are meaningful for them while we're still living, and to share that with each other? Like, that would be so beautiful.
Yeah, Absolutely. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. And so if people are getting inspired now, they're tuning in, they're listening to us talking about death, like, it's just an average conversation, and they want to start talking about it. How do they even approach that with their family and friends? How do they begin that conversation and start bringing it up?
So I've tried to approach this in lots of different from lots of different angles, and some have been some of them have been successful and some of them have not. By and large, what I feel works the best is to start with yourself, right? So the only person that we can control the emotions of and the thoughts and the words of are ourselves. How people react is really not up to us, and it's not our responsibility. Our responsibility is taking 100% responsibility for ourselves. So what I have started doing is talking about the steps that I have taken, the fact that myself, my husband have and some of inspired some of our friends to do the same. um what are the steps that we've taken, what are our wishes, and then just leaving it. The agenda isn't to push this onto anybody who's not ready, but if they're not ready, to express our opinion on that person and then back off.
Mhm.
But just lead by example, I guess. Because, just a couple of weeks ago, I was having a conversation with my youngest aunt, and she was like, "Oh, I don't understand all of these conversations you're having and why you're pushing everybody." And I'm like, "Well, have you got your affairs in order?" I'm like, I have actually. "Oh, good for you, but we haven't." And I didn't say anything, Jennifer, but my thing was, uh, what do you want me to say? I mean, if you think that you have 4 children and that you're just going to leave things up in the air because you think you're going to live forever, then good luck. You know, how I mean, I'm what, 20 years younger than her, and if I have my affairs in order, the only thing I can wish is that, I can inspire by example. So, um I've had the audacity to sit in front of people who are 80 and 90 years old and actually have these conversations, and they're all like, "What?" And I'm like, "Yeah, what's wrong with it?" They're like, "Oh, but we're scared." I'm like, "Well, why?" When I first started, it was awkward. I did feel that I was being really cheeky. But you know what? Those conversations turned so magical because they suddenly found a doorway through which they shared these memories of their lives, times when they were young and they've lost people, and they've never had those conversations because they've never been welcome. And I then find myself so privileged to be a receptor of all of these experiences and emotions.
Mm.
And that's why I genuinely feel these conversations are very, very important. You can't live your life if you're going to be in denial of the most important fact of life, which is that life is finite.
Mm.
You're living half a truth here.
Mhm.
you know if you don't even stop to consider it, what you want to do with it is the second part of the story, but at least stop and consider is what I would encourage anyone who's listening to us now or listening to the replay. I mean, it's my passionate wish for everybody because my life has changed after I've done it.
Mm. And I know in the book that you wrote a chapter two for
Mhm.
finding abundance by through accepting death. Now that's really interesting. Can you share a little bit about what that means?
So I touched on this point a little earlier, which is again from my personal experience. When I had that whole experience of looking into my eyes and actually accepting that I'm going to die, it really helped me disconnect from my material possessions. I know everyone says, and we've heard this, it's written in a lot of different books, and everyone's spoken about it, that born alone, die alone, and can't take anything with you except if you're a pharaoh. But you can try, but but ultimately you're not taking anything with you. And so therefore, how can you be the most responsible for the possessions that you have worked so hard to earn and collect?
Mm.
And then what do you want done with those possessions once you actually own that, there is infinite abundance to be found there. And of course, that looks different for each person because each of us are unique, and things and relationships in the world looks different to each of us. But I promise everyone that if you just view your present through the lens of the other side, imagining putting yourself in a position that you're not of this world anymore, you're just looking in on your life, on your home, none of those things are yours anymore. The t-shirt you wouldn't give somebody today, tomorrow is going to be chucked out and sent for charity because no one will know what that meant to you. How does that make you feel? Now what do you want to do with that t-shirt or brooch or, I don't know, pair of glasses, you know?
Yeah.
It does really free you up. It does make you think differently, and that's the abundance I'm talking about.
Thank you, Natasha. And for everyone that's been tuning in right now into this podcast episode, Natasha's actually gifting you all with this chapter in the book, Wealth Codes, and we'll have the link for that in the show notes. And Natasha, how can people connect with you to learn more, discover more, or actually have any questions?
So the best way to connect with me is Instagram. The umbrella under which I work is called Body Speak. So my Instagram handle will be there in the show notes, but it's basically bodyspeak.in on Instagram. So on Instagram, because honestly, I'm evolving so much right now, very, very rapidly, especially with this move to the mountains and stuff like that, that I don't have anything on offer right this second, but a few months down the line, there'll be something or the other because life is really ramped up. So the best way to be posted on what my activities are, whether it be the new book or a workshop or whatever, is Instagram. And the second place is, of course, Jennifer, our Sacred You community. If people sign up, then I run a tribe every Thursday called Money, Mindset, Manifestation, Magic. And we have all sorts of conversations around self-worth. And that starts from the seeds that were sown when we were children all the way to the fear of death, because it all then impacts our bank balance. And then once we gain that freedom, like what you asked about the abundance thing through death, once you actually master that whole thing, then you are actually free to manifest anything your heart desires. But it's a journey and it needs support, and that's why I have the tribe. As you I'm sure you'll I'm sure you speak about it enough, how economical it is to join, and then we're all there just to support each other. And so then I'm there to support on that subject without it being, you know, a sort of economic exercise.
Yes. Amazing. Thank you, Natasha. Yes, everyone, we are both a part, Natasha and I are both part of sacredyou.love community, and we'd love for you to be too. Anyone can join. And if you're feeling drawn to checking out the Natasha's tribe and all the different tribes and panel discussions and so much more, I'll have the link
Masterclasses.
show notes for you too, so you can have a look at that. Natasha, it's been such a joy and a pleasure talking with you today and so openly about death. And I wonder if there's anything else that you'd like to share and leave the audience with today.
I would like to repeat what I said earlier. It's I was on a podcast once and they asked me to like leave 3 words of wisdom. And so I touched upon that before, and I will say that here and leave our listeners with that accept that life is finite. Truly accept it. And then surrender to what is. And when I say surrender, I don't mean giving up, I mean giving in. Letting go of that resistance of the have to, must, should, and really find out what life means to you and just realize that it's precious and it's finite.
Life is precious and finite. Thank you so much, Natasha. And thank you for each and every one of you that have been joining us today on Awaken and Ascend. Bye for now.